Tēnā koutou katoa. Haere mai, everyone. I'm Esther, the comms executive at the FSC. Welcome to our webinar, where we're answering how financially resilient are Kiwis from FSC's newest Financial Resilience Index for 2025. I'll hand it over now to Dr. Patrick Nolan from Te Ara Ahunga Ora, the Retirement Commission, to kick off the webinar and introduce the panel.
Oh, thanks, Esther, and welcome everyone to today's webinar on how financially resilient are Kiwis. As Esther mentioned, my name is Patrick Nolan, and I'm the Director of Policy and Research at Te Ara Ahunga Ora Retirement Commission. And I am very much looking forward to the session today. Life is full of surprises, and sometimes these surprises are good, but sometimes they're bad. And we shouldn't underestimate how often bad things can happen. It's not just rare events like global pandemics and earthquakes. Think about extreme weather events and flooding, and actually how often these weather events are happening now with climate change. And of course, changes in economic conditions can have an impact too. A change in these conditions can mean that people lose jobs and income, consumers can stop spending, or the prices of essentials like insurance and rates can go up. So the question of how resilient Kiwi households are, how financially resilient Kiwi households are, is critical. And fortunately, we're lucky that this is a topic that the Financial Services Council has been tracking for 5 years now. This gives us a good insight into how Kiwis are prepared to face financial challenges. So in today's discussion, we'll hear from a range of experts who will share their insights on financial confidence, literacy, preparedness, job security, and overall well-being. So I'll very quickly introduce the speakers. We'll start with David Bishop, who's the research lead at the Financial Services Council. As well as bringing a real depth of experience to the research on financial services, he's a budding viticulturalist and winemaker in his spare time. We'll then hear from Elle Wuthrich, who is a financial advisor at Naked Finance. She not only brings a decade of experience in the finance industry, but as a proud first-generation Kiwi, has a real desire to reduce some of the gaps we see in the outcomes in this area, including for women. And finally, we'll hear from Meagan Tuckerman, who's the Chief Marketing Officer of Momentum Life. As well as in New Zealand, she's worked across Europe and the UK, meaning we can benefit from her experience across a wide range of environments and issues, including how to improve consumer engagement. And once we've heard from all three speakers, we'll then have a question and answer session with the audience. So if you want to raise questions, then please use the Q&A function, as Elle mentioned. So I think that's enough from me. So it's my pleasure to pass over to David.
Thank you, Patrick, and hello, everyone. This is the FSC's nearly 31st or 32nd research report. We've been running research from the FSC on behalf of the industry for since 2018, and with the help of our amazing research committee, came up with the Financial Resilience Index about 5 years ago. So we're starting to get a bit of track data now. This year's research was in field in February 25, so we just need to be aware of the fact that life might have changed a little bit, and some of the things that have been happening over the last 100 days are certainly maybe impacting. So, but certainly still very relevant. And as we've tracked over time, I think we're starting to see now, bearing in mind this was out in February, that this is kind of like we're kind of stabilizing in some of our financial thinking day to day. There's some signals of optimism out there, and it feels like we're kind of sort of at the bottom of the curve, and optimism with perhaps some unease looking forward. So really interesting set of results. As Patrick said, we'll briefly look at the 5 indicators: financial confidence, literacy, preparedness, job security, and well-being. I just want to touch on each of those, and then we'll move on to Ellie and to Meagan. But just to say that there's quite a lot of reporting going on now with others' research, and I'll pick on a couple as we go through. But the Credit Bureau Centrix came out with their latest report in March, and there's kind of optimism on the horizon. They're seeing some of the signs of gradual recovery, some of the debt easing and arrears easing. So it feels as though the whole narrative is around that sort of space. But we mustn't forget that. But there's still a lot of people feeling a pinch, and in some cases, a lot of financial stress still. So we'll touch on that as we go through. Moving on to the first indicator, financial confidence. Overall, like we said, things have remained relatively stable over the last sort of 3 years. We've seen a bit of a drop there in that sort of extremely confident space in terms of financial decision making and financial confidence. And actually, when we did a bit of digging in that, is actually the people without KiwiSaver that's confidence actually were dropping more than people done with KiwiSaver. And as we go through the research of people that have followed the FSC researchers, we do deep dive a little further as we go through the year with more reports. So we'll start to deep dive a little bit more in that space. But certainly that kind of extremely confident in financial decision making. This is all self-reported. And I think, some of the indicators, though, what we're seeing is that there are a few more people that can continue without an income for 6 months or more. There's a few more people that have got $5,000 there for emergency savings. So this is why we're kind of seeing this stable but kind of almost optimism coming through. We move on to financial literacy. When it comes to financial literacy, really, we've done a bit of work of this in the past. We might touch on it as we go through the Q&A. But this kind of financial confidence versus financial literacy, there's a gap in this, and I think it feels as though, especially when you look at this chart here on the right hand side, there's a real lack of confidence in or literacy in investment and market themes and trends. And that to me suggests that people are quite confident perhaps in their day-to-day budgeting, everyday finances, but when it starts to get even close to some of these potentially more complex areas like investment, it becomes challenging for New Zealanders. And looking at some of the digging into some of the stats, even those that are most confident in making, or say they're most confident in making financial decisions, about 46% of them say they're not very literate in current investment market themes. So it indicates that this perception around confidence and balance between literacy is still an issue in New Zealand. One of the things that's quite interesting is that the KiwiSaver thing comes up time and time again. KiwiSaver is an investment product, but 81% of Kiwis are in KiwiSaver, so it is the gateway, I think, and continues to grow. And it's around how do we increase its effectiveness and help people through their lifetimes. Just touching on financial literacy. So moving on then into preparedness, just quickly. Again, we see a slight increase in the employed and a current lifestyle, living lifestyle for longer than 6 months. But again, as we've seen in previous resilience index, it's the under 30s and the women that are less likely to be able to find that, to have that backup or find the 5,000 in an emergency. So we still have those gaps occurring through the research. Still worrying that more people feel they're less prepared for retirement. And again, when we dig into their sort of retirement or investment savings or what they rely on for retirement, those that are retired, 86% are relying on NZ Super, 24% on KiwiSaver, which is perhaps as you might expect because of the age of KiwiSaver. But what's worrying is only about 50% have other savings. So when we think about preparedness for retirement, the reliance on NZ Super and KiwiSaver is a real reality for most. I'll just move on to job security. The research showed here that although job security is at 80%, which feels quite high, it's actually been dropping, I think, reasonably a lot since 2023. So it's dropped about 10%. And job security, it's about 1 in 5 aren't secure about their jobs. And we know from the research that job security is really closely correlated with happiness with your financial situation, as probably isn't that much of a surprise. But so really, when people start to feel less secure in their jobs and their roles, they're starting to feel less secure in their finances. And if you look at that correlation, those that are completely secure and are very or somewhat happy about their finances, about 64%. Those that are very much worrying about their job security regularly, are at about 78% are very unhappy with their finances. So there's a real correlation we find in there, which is a real important indicator, I think, when we go through some of the times that we've been going through over the past year. And last but not least, just touching on well-being on the final slide. On the right-hand side here, we've seen 55% or equivalent to 2 million Kiwis worrying about money daily or weekly, which is a marked increase from 3 years ago. So people are worrying, Kiwis are worrying about money more often than 3 years ago. Non-homeowners, younger cohorts tend to worry more. And indeed, if we dig into some of the research, some of the questions that isn't published in the Financial Resilience Index but supports it, we're still seeing, it's concerning, we're still seeing that about 1 in 7 Kiwis are skipping meals or choosing not to take medicine. So when we say that things are kind of on the up and there's optimism there, there's still a huge amount of concern around and people basically not being able to put food meals on the table. And certainly Helen Clark Foundation did released a similar report from 2024 where they saw that 1 in 4 Kiwis were skipping meals. So, you know, there's some stability, there's some optimism, but there certainly is some issues. And overall, the data shows that, you know, maybe we're starting to see some light at the end of the tunnel. KiwiSaver is still a real key to helping support and provide going through the life stages. And we just need to really be focusing on helping New Zealanders understand, protect, and save for their futures. So that's just a real quick, brief run through of the research there, Patrick.
Thank you, David. It's good that you started off on an optimistic note, but there were some worrying findings later on in the presentation. So I'll pass over to Elle and Meagan to respond.
I'm just going to do a little deep dive with regards to what I've seen out in my community. So for those on the call, I am Elle and I am based in South Auckland. That's where I was born and raised. So heavily involved in my community. However, I work out of Hobsonville Point. I had to do a presentation just recently to a cohort of Pacific businesswomen, and I underwent my own research, and I found through the TRA, the Pacifica Deep Dive, that our people tend to be more financially vulnerable and are more likely to be in an uncomfortable financial position. 77% experienced financial stress in the last 12 months, and 31% gave money to others when they can't afford it and they just don't know how to stop. And I thought that was quite worrying. 79% of them, they perceive there are more barriers to active money management. And a lot of that revolves around lack of knowledge and experience in financial literacy. So there is lower levels of financial literacy, but when they want to get financial guidance, what I thought was really interesting is they go to family and friends as their first port of call, then their social media, the banks, the workplace, and then advisors. So advisors sit at 5th place. So if they're going to their friends and family, usually these people are of the same ilk, they're in a very similar position. So they're not going to get the most credible or helpful advice. So a lot of them also don't understand what a session with a financial advisor entails. So when I had a couple of meetings with some women, and it wasn't just about your budget and your income and your outgoings, it was a broader conversation around where you are at. I ended up with women telling me that they're going through a separation, and then I was having to discuss, getting a family lawyer so we could talk about, protecting, making sure that, I guess, their assets and their liabilities are all on the table so that they can negotiate fairly. So the conversations aren't just around insurance, about, how much are you earning, and what is your KiwiSaver. It is on a broader scale. We talk about optimizing your KiwiSaver if you are having children, thinking about your contributions, and also thinking about getting a kid's KiwiSaver started as soon as they arrive, because that is the best time to get a child investing, because you've got this longer term horizon where you could potentially be giving your child a deposit, like helping them get a deposit into their first home. And so using things like KiwiSaver is fantastic, because no one's, mum and dad's not going to dip in when there's a family emergency. It is locked away. So yeah, that's my take.
For me, a little bit of background is me. I'm Meagan Tuckerman. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Momentum Life. As well as that, I'm actually the co-chair of the Consumer Engagement Committee. I think for me, one of the things I'm really interested in is financial literacy, the impact on New Zealanders and how that affects their well-being. When I looked at this year's report around financial literacy and the findings, when you look at it a top line, the drop of 3% seems not too bad. But it's not a huge drop. But I think what you have to look at is, if you look back at the Fry research over time, what we're seeing is it's a trend that it actually keeps going down. And one of the things we saw in 2023, it was 47%. So now it's at 45%. But the reality is there's a lot of effort across the financial services community going into trying to address financial literacy. But the outtake is we're actually not making any difference, and we're not improving that. So I guess for me, it raises the question when I think about it, and we're thinking about what we do as an industry as well, how do we redirect those efforts to actually make a benefit for consumers across New Zealand and actually start to see this move in a positive trend rather in a negative trajectory. And I do think it's a little bit about, at the moment, when we think about who we're targeting. Look, we did a little bit of research at the SSC, and it's a really interesting thing. If you look at financial education at the moment, there's a lot in schools. There's Sorted's doing an amazing job. There's a lot of support with banker and things. So if you're currently in education, you've done really well. There's a huge focus on retirement and supporting people in retirement. But actually, one of the things, if you look at, is younger generations at the moment. So if you're sitting there and you're in your early 20s, you missed the schools programs because they weren't quite there, and you're a little bit too young for really thinking about retirement, but you don't really understand financial literacy and what that means. So for me, it's about how do we start to engage, especially with what I call the 20 to 35-year-olds who have missed their education. What can we do differently, and how can we start engaging them in the conversation so that we see literacy improve?
Thanks, Meagan. Just be interested in reflections, picking up on your point, Meagan, about how we better target it. And I'm interested in thinking across the life course, because obviously if you're a 55-year-old, maybe you're recently divorced, then the challenges you face are quite different if you're 20 years old and thinking about your first home. So to what degree do you think we should be thinking across the life course, and what implications do you think that would have?
I think for me, one of the things when I think about messaging to people about financial literacy is it's not the same for everyone, which is sort of where you're at, Patrick. And our messaging and the channels that we communicate to people need to actually reflect what we're doing. So, when you think about if you're younger in schools, they are using different channels, and that messaging would be different from if you're 55 plus. And I think what we haven't done probably as an industry, and there's some international experience where maybe they have done a little bit more here, is altering our messaging for both your age and stage of life so that it resonates with you. Look, we also have to realise that financial literacy, while people recognise it's important, it's not necessarily the most sexy thing that they would see in their life. And, especially for those younger people, you're battling a lot to try and get cut through with them. So if they're on a social media channel, I think we have to recognise that there'll be some people who are really interested, and there always really are, and people who are engaged. But to try and get that bulk of New Zealanders who see this as important but not sure where it sits, how can we do that in a different way that engages them? And that might be shorter messaging. It's definitely ensuring that they know the role of advisors and what that is, and how they can engage with advisors, because I think there's been a lot of research that says people aren't sure how to do that. So how can we get that messaging out there to say, hey, this is how you can even access an advisor? And I think it'll be a lot of steps across a lot of areas that actually make an impact over probably a longer time period. It's not something that will change in the next 12 months.
Oh, great, thanks. Thanks, Meagan. I'm not convinced that financial literacy isn't a sexy topic, but anyway, working at the Retirement Commission, maybe I've got a bias. But Elle.
I totally agree with Meagan. You have to have the messaging in the right channel, and everyone's really different. So when I found I was trying to communicate with those in my community, they prefer to see you face to face. And that's a really hard thing to do when you're one person. If there's like tons of us, advisors out there doing this, then that's fantastic. But they want to see you, they want to earn your trust and kind of get a feel for you before they start sharing information towards you. And then you've got, the older generation, like who are they listening to on the radio, per se? So everyone's really different with the channels that they're going to engage with. Some people love a good old podcast, and they have, their time and space. And then there are those who love little short reels on Instagram and, follow their own influencers. So depending on the age and stage, the messaging is going to be different and the channel is going to be different as well.
Yeah, I completely support that. And I was just looking back at our perception gap research that we did a couple of years ago to try and sort of start to understand, what is financial literacy and what is financial confidence, and what do the different ages and stages really need to know to trigger to do the right thing. And the professional advice stuff is really important. But when we looked at those questions, we asked 4 questions around interest rates on savings. We asked a question on safer returns on shares or on riskier shares or non-riskier shares. We talked around investment with a high return is likely to be high risk, and asked those sort of questions. And really, it's not that surprising that the younger cohorts, so the 29 years and below, so 18 to 29-year-olds, averaged about 2 to 2.4 out of 5 correct answers on those questions. And as we went up to sort of 60-year-olds and above, they were getting 3.5, 4 right. So it's really important, I think, to target what is the action, what is financial literacy when you're coming out of school. Your retirement's never going to happen to you. You're looking at what you're doing today, perhaps more, but then thinking, well, I do need to save stuff, or I do want to go on holiday, or I do want to do things. So I understand the need for that, but what is the actual point? And anecdotally, I remember going out doing some vox pops when I'd just done the first lot of research on KiwiSaver for Financial Services Council in 2018. I went on the street with a microphone and asked young people, about KiwiSaver and finances and what they thought. And the overwhelming thing that came back from the younger cohort was, well, I'm never going to be able to afford a mortgage. I'm never going to be able to do this. And that kind of goes to this kind of impression that actually, just that of course there is opportunity. It's just about how you go and tackle that opportunity. So yeah, I agree totally with both Elle and Meagan.
Right. Thank you all. So we've had a few questions come in, so thank you to those people who have provided questions. There's a few more on financial literacy, so I think we'll have one more round on this topic, and then it'll be good to move on to maybe savings and that sort of thing. But David Boyle has asked about the role of KiwiSaver providers, and Jaden Beckman has asked about initiatives undertaken to educate advisors who are not comfortable to make financial decisions. And Amy Dove has also asked about what do we think is driving the decrease in financial literacy, given that information is more readily available. So there's a cluster of things there, but it's about, again, it goes back to the point I think it was Elle raised about the sources of advice and the role of KiwiSaver providers, but also why do we feel what in the environment is changing financial literacy. So I'll maybe go from David, Elle, and then Meagan.
I can start on that one around where people are really seem to be comfortable is the KiwiSaver space. So 81% of New Zealanders, just looking at the stats, have got 81% overall, 86% female, and 75% male. They're all invested in KiwiSaver. So KiwiSaver, I think, has an amazing potential part to play in understanding what actually a younger person's potentially going into when they join the workforce. Not just here's a KiwiSaver form, sign it, you'll get 3% and off you go. Right? There's a real opportunity there to sort of help, as I was saying, help people really understand that as they get into the workplace, or as they whatever that might be, whether that's at leaving school, leaving university, whatever that might be. So it feels as though it's a real real game changer. We've always said that about KiwiSaver, as we've seen it grow over the last period, and certainly since we've been researching it, is there is a gateway. It's not ubiquitous, but it's virtually ubiquitous, to be able to say, hey, to Elle's point, there's this, but also you might want to do a bit of protecting your health. You might want to think about how you're going to access some shorter term savings. So it feels as though it's a real key to unlock some of this stuff. And so, yeah, I completely agree that, I think KiwiSaver providers, but also employers at large, have a real good part to play in this.
I was just reading Jaden's comment there, a question, sorry. And it is very interesting that he referred to fees. So again, I don't feel like our industry is marketed, and a lot of people understand what it is we do and what that entails. A lot of people think you need to have a lot of money before you go and see a financial advisor. And for some advisors, that's absolutely true. And then there's the other end where you've just bought a house and people start to think, oh, okay, I need to get some life insurance, or I need to get some income protection. And usually there's some kind of event that has happened that has triggered them to see a financial advisor. A lot of people don't realize you can just go and speak to one. If you have a KiwiSaver, you've started working, you can actually go speak to one, and a lot of us don't charge fees. So just book a time and we will tell you through our disclosure exactly how we're going to be remunerated. Usually it's in the form of commissions paid by the provider that we'll put you with. But you as a client do not have to pay a fee. There are some outfits out there that definitely do charge, and they will tell you straight up front, but the majority of us do not charge fees. So already that barrier has been taken away, and people can access us.
Meagan?
Yeah, I think I'll probably circle back to where David was around KiwiSaver being an entry for people, especially as we look at younger people. It is that gateway, as he said. And I think there's probably more we could do around supporting employers or people as they start to get into the sort of financial wellness program, so that they see it really positively. And, what I guess some employers do this really well in terms of, larger employees providing, employer provided financial education so that people actually know what KiwiSaver is, and that we could broaden that out more broadly. And I think the other thing is, as employers, that we call all lookers, improving their access to financial advisors. Have worked in insurance for a very long time. And I sort of know now that, this is one of the biggest barriers that people had, which is what Elle was saying, is the access and, the question of how do I find a financial advisor is one that is really difficult for people. And I think there's quite a lot of education to be done in that space as well.
Just on that, and just looking back at some research we did into professional advice a couple of years ago, we asked a whole bunch of people what was the benefit of receiving professional financial advice, and 81% said it gave me greater peace of mind, through to greater confidence in making decisions. 70% helped achieve goals. 70%. So all those things that Elle and Meagan are talking around the evidence is there. I think it's about how do you open and show people that 50% said it transformed their life. There's real stories, there's real data, there's a real large amount of positivity around professional financial advice, but only 18% of New Zealanders take it around that sort of mark. So there lies the second gap, I guess, which is what Elle and Meagan really highlighted well.
Well, thank you, David. So Katie Tolan had a question, which was, and it sort of reminded me of a point that you made, David, right at the start. So she asked, in her field of work, they're interested in the kind of savings that can be readily converted into cash, i.e. not long-term investments, but money to go in times of need. And so we've discussed KiwiSaver a lot, but what about, David, you mentioned the lack of other forms of savings. And so what are some of your sort of reflections in that area?
I'm looking really directly at the data now from that underlies the Financial Resilience Index, just to give an idea of where people are investing elsewhere other than KiwiSaver. So out of the respondents, 80% said they had savings and investments, and majority after KiwiSaver was cash. So around 40% people said they had cash in the bank. About 23% New Zealand shares. About 18% in property, and then we go into the managed funds space. A few in cryptocurrency actually, which is risen a little bit, about 11%, mostly male, and that's kind of sort of the broad spectrum. And I guess what I'm starting to see, having sort of witnessed the shares' revolution, if you like, and all these online revolutions, and Kernel I just saw today have now released savings elements to their products. They've released ETF managed fund elements to their products. So access to areas in which you can save money that's not sort of bound in for these emergencies, or for sort of the short, medium, long term. We always talk around, I guess, in terms of savings. So something in case something goes, my car breaks down tomorrow, something a bit more medium term if I want to go on a holiday or looking to save for a house, and something for the longer term, which kind of jumps over into the retirement space. But we've also got to really keep in our mind here that that's all well and good, but there's still a lot of people that are struggling and skipping meals and skipping medication. So it's a real hard ask, especially in the kind of times we've been through, that's where people go, and that's what people do. But there's a lot of people that really don't have the funds even to create that short term, medium term kind of space. So I think that's one of the challenges, as hopefully, if we keep moving on an upward trend, the financial services industry has to try and encourage people that are now getting a bit more money in their pocket, aren't skipping meals, what they then do with that money to build back up this short, medium term, long term. Sorry, longer answer than you expected probably, but
no, it was good, thank you, David. And it sort of segues nicely into Elle's work, because I guess, Elle, I'm wondering how much of the balance of the work that you do, or the concerns you have, relate to those sort of more immediate needs, needing to put the food on the table, versus sort of optimizing, your retirement and optimizing the longer term settings.
Yeah, so a lot of it is having a look at what's happening right now, where is the money going, and just even starting with a very little bit of money. So it's starting those habits. So even if it's $5 and you're putting it into a savings, I quite like Booster Savvy. A lot of us in the office use it. It's a product that, I would encourage people to go Google it, look it up. It has 3.5% return, so slightly better than like a savings account, but you can have a debit card, and it's you've got different stacks where you could put your money. So it's a fantastic way of getting someone to start thinking about saving their money, doing it bit by bit, getting a slightly higher return than usual. But yeah, we always start small. So yes, things that need immediate attention we look at, and we make sure that's taken care of. But we will always look at some way of you starting to form a habit of getting into savings or investing.
Right. And Meagan, are there similar considerations around the consumer engagement? I'm just wondering, that might not be an either or, but is there do you think if we focus more on the short term, would we get more engagement, as opposed to sort of encouraging people to optimize for longer term settings, which might be 15, 20, 30 years down the track?
Yeah, again, I think some of these things that, it's very much dependent on your life stage as well, and what's appropriate for you. I think for me, one of the focus on short term is, yes, if you're younger, we've already said that we know from the research that's where people are really concerned about, how am I going to afford my day to day? How am I going to afford, potentially buying a house is now out of my realm, and how do we make that more accessible? I think as I was sort of listening to people, I think one of the things, and a really interesting example of maybe someone who has made an inroad in this space, is when you think about Sharesies and a platform for doing things differently, it's a really good example of, getting people to try, and you can start small. So when we think about investing or doing things differently, it, very much puts it in their hands, but it enables people to start with a smaller amount of money and start to get those skills and try and, really encourage yourself to do it while you're younger as well. But it's a really accessible platform. And they have done a very good job, and they obviously, they concentrate a lot of their time on effort engaging with their client base, the customers that they have in the platform, and they're doing a really good job.
Great. And we've got a related question. So Jackie Curry has asked, we've talked a lot about, targeting across the life course, but there's also, she's asked how we ensure research on financial awareness and literacy and confidence is targeted across multi-ethnic and gender balanced groups. So there's another dimension to all of this. So I don't know, Meagan, if you want to come in on that.
Look, it's a really good point. Part of the work we're doing as the Consumer Engagement Committee is looking at directly that, how do we start to engage with iwi and local community and groups? Because as Elle mentioned, a lot of people want to engage maybe on a face-to-face basis or within their local community. And I think it's, how can we help and assist those groups with the right information to try and get it into the hands of the people who are looking for it. I don't think at the moment, look, there's a lot of people, when we did a little bit of research about who's doing what where, there's a lot of community groups making a lot of efforts, but I guess what there hasn't been and what's not clear is that coordination across all of those different groups so that we start to make more of an inroad. And I guess as an industry, it's one of the things we can look at, what can we do to help, or what information can we provide to these local iwi and community groups and actually help them, get it out more broadly.
Great, thanks. And Elle, I don't know if you wanted to come in on that as well. How do we recognise the diversity in our customers and our clients?
I think that's quite a tough thing to address, because if we look at the majority of advisors, they tend to be middle-aged white males, and we're starting to see an increase in females entering the industry. People like to talk to others that look like them and can resonate with them. So I think there is going to be a bit of a challenge there. However, like for me, I'm all about just going out into my community and actually engaging with them. So when Meagan talks about, that outreach, I go to my gym and we've set something up for the 8-week challenge where we're going to teach financial literacy and have workshops around getting into your first home and stuff like that. So really engaging with them face to face. So that's my way of being able to help my community. Some of the guys, we also go out to high schools, work with government bodies, going into the workplace and actually having workshops so that, again, people can understand what it is we do, feel comfortable about talking about money, and then we can go from there and figure out, what it is we need to do from an advice perspective.
And David?
Sure. I mean, I guess the 2 points I'd make on it. One is that we've talked around a lot in other research is just a general change in population demographics, and I don't think we're doing enough really to work into that and really recognise the needs of different communities within New Zealand. That's number one. The second thing is, which is really interesting, I'm part of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee for the FSC, and we had Elton Seacon from Ringaora, one of the workplace development committees, present to us this last week on the demographics or the ethnicity of people working in financial services, and even in that, in terms of representation of ethnic groups. There's a real challenge in that space. So I think one place that the financial services community can start is to actually look at ways in which to help and encourage different ethnicities into financial services, because there's some blockers there with people, right? If somebody's walking into a workplace which is not ethnically diverse, it can be quite a challenge. How can we drive a better representation of New Zealand within the financial services is one challenge I put out to the financial services community as a place to start as well.
Great, thank you. So we've got another question in from Tamika. It's a very much a good question. It's very much the question of one of the questions of the day. So there seem to be a growing number of online scams and unregulated advice, particularly on social media. Do we think we're doing enough to educate the general public on how to identify scams? And I think this is particularly important with AI. We were discussing it before the session started. It really is unbelievable what can be done now with AI. And so there's this challenge around scams is only going to become much more challenging. So I might, in the same order as before. So David, I'll throw that over to you.
The answer is yes, I think. That's the easy answer, I guess. My mum was over last month for a while, and she got a text message from something in the UK that she was really worried about because she wasn't there, and it was very sophisticated. There was a lot of kind of having to kind of sit down, calm her down and stuff, because she's in her 80s and the other side of the world, and something's threatening her life. From that, it was really upsetting. So listen, it's sophisticated. I've seen a lot more activity from a lot of providers in the financial services sector, raising what scams are, and I've seen it across the world, and I just think we've just got to do more and more and more. So yeah, short answer is definitely yes.
Elle, is this something you're seeing in your customers, a sort of increased exposure to scams?
Oh, it's even closer to home than that. It's so my dad's in his 80s and an avid lover of Facebook. So he got caught up in a scam, and he ended up giving personal details away to some individual who wasn't who they said they were. He didn't realize. So he's 84. So I think there's a generation of people who honestly take things as they see them. They believe that profile picture is that person that's having a conversation with me. And when they say that, someone's sick and needs money, they think that's true. So yes, I agree with David to the extent that providers, banks and stuff are now, sending out notifications and letting us know how to spot a scammer if there's a phone call, because a lot of us don't pick up phone calls now unless we know the number. But for the elderly, I think that's a completely, that's a separate kettle of fish. They do struggle with that, and there needs to be more education around the elderly in social media and scams. Yeah.
And absolutely. Meagan?
Yep, I think I'm just joining the trend here that yes, it's obviously a problem, and there's a lot of work trying to address it within the industry. But as Elle said, and with elderly population especially, I think it's really difficult. I sit here again, like Elle and like David, I have a 85-year-old father who managed to, give away $10,000 to a scammer. When you see what it was very sophisticated. And I think it's how can we help people to start recognize that, and especially people who maybe are not as technology literate. They are getting increasingly sophisticated. They look more and more like they are real. And it's a difficult problem for the industry, and I think it's only one that we can keep trying to address. It's again another, we're not going to solve it overnight. As the AI impacts it and the hackers get, more and more sophisticated, as an industry, we have to keep changing to try and keep up with it and help people as much as we can.
So we've had a few more questions come in. I'll probably just take just a couple more because we're getting near the end. One here from an anonymous attendee has asked about, has noted that not all advisors can provide comprehensive financial advice, and has also talked about the need, basically, financial advisors need to ensure their businesses remain profitable. So how can we balance competing challenges and help the people that need helping? So we've talked a lot about financial advice, I guess, on the demand side, but what about on the supply side? What about as an industry? Do you think we're doing enough to advise the advisors or support the advisors? I don't know, David, maybe if you come in on that one, and then Elle.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, the FSC's done a hell of a lot of work in the past supporting the transition to the new financial advice regime, as I know Financial Advice New Zealand do as well. And we're still committed to doing that. And some of the things we're doing, for example, our special interest groups now focusing on special topics to help the advisor community come together to start discussing some of these issues and where it is. But, listen, we did in the research this year, we asked around the importance of building trust with a financial advisor of the respondents, and the ideas of clear and consistent communication, the advisor's understanding of what the client's trying to achieve, being ethical and have integrity, transparency around fees and processes, as Elle said. That's one of the first things she sits down and does, and then just that experience and qualifications piece. So there's lots of information, and I think lots of groups which are there to support the financial advisors and the financial advice community. Again, I think it's going back to Meagan's point, there's a bit of fragmentation, and we just the tighter we get to support the kind of more consistent the message. But that's just from my perspective, looking at the research.
I don't know, Elle or Meagan? Elle?
Yep, sure. So yeah, I'm very fortunate to be working in an advice practice where it's holistic advice that we give. So it's not just like one channel, or we just only do insurances or just investments. I'm able to sit with a client and be able to then refer their business on to the mortgage advisor. All the details already there. So it really takes the hassle away from the client having to regurgitate their entire situation. So it makes things a lot easier. Like I said, we don't charge fees, and I guess it is hard. I'm guessing the person that had this question is an advisor out there. With regards to having a sustainable business, you do have to be very mindful, and they would know this, about how quickly you grow, because you don't want to end up making rash decisions to get commission to fund your business and not have the client's interests at heart. So like I said, again, very fortunate to be in a position where I can help my clients, and I'm remunerated well doing it. It has taken many years to get to this point. When you're first starting out as an advisor, it is very tough, but I'm a bit more established now. And I would say if you're looking for advice, it would be great to work with one that provides holistic advice and can help you across the board. So you can build a relationship with them.
Thank you. Meagan, did you want to come in on this?
Yeah, probably not a lot from me on this one. Look, it's one of those areas where, again, different companies are supporting advisors in a lot of different ways. And it is, again, it is that difficulty when you think from a consumer perspective, where we have advisors not providing full comprehensive financial advice and only in specific areas. How can we get that message to consumers about the different types of advice available and how it can support them in different products? So I sort of flip it back to the consumer, I guess, messaging and making sure that they understand the types out there and how we could, how they can be supported, and that there is differentiation between advisors.
Great. Well, thank you all. We've got, there's one last question. I've been saving this one. So Amy Dove asked, do we think government and employers are doing enough with KiwiSaver. I'd also, I like to ask this at the end of events, sort of generalize it. If you could be Prime Minister for a day and do anything, or wave a magic wand and change anything, so what would you do? So what would be the big thing that you'd really like to change? And it could be KiwiSaver related, as Amy asked, or it could be more general. So maybe Meagan, Elle, and then I'll finish with David. Yep.
I think I think that's a really big question. I think for me, the magic wand of what we can do, it is just trying to connect with people and get the message out there in a way that resonates with them in the right space. I do think we need to recognise that, not everyone is the same. We have different communities that we need to engage with, and, as a financial services community more broadly, we need to start making sure that we recognise the various groups we're connecting with, but having a holistic message that we start to actually all align to.
Right, cool. Thanks, Meagan. Elle?
I would like everyone to just take action and actually sit with a financial advisor and just have that experience so they understand what it could be like and what their future could like, so that they have visibility of where they're at and and are hopeful for the future and can set those goals.
All right, thank you. David, you're Prime Minister for a day?
Having worked for the government, I decided a long time ago I didn't want to be Prime Minister for any time of my life, all the time, because it's a tough job. But hey, it feels to me, I agree completely with Meagan and Elle. It feels to me that there's the advice gap, there's the KiwiSaver as being a ubiquitous tool to be able to help us be more secure for our futures. And as the FSC has been talking around, and I know the Retirement Commission as well, how do we actually get people to, and how do we get more investment in the longer term KiwiSaver space to help people have a dignified retirement? So I focus on that contribution side.
Great. Well, thank you all. I just want to thank the speakers for today for what was a fascinating series of discussions. We talked a lot about financial literacy, talked about how it varies across the life force, the need to understand and reflect the diversity in the population, a lot of discussion around KiwiSaver and how we optimize the KiwiSaver settings, but also the important role of other short-term savings. So I think I'll pass over to Esther now. She's going to talk a little bit about what's coming up next. But thank you to the speakers, and thank you to the FSC for doing this work. It really is a very rich source of advice, and it's great that you've done it over 5 years, so we're getting that longitudinal picture. And, as I said, this is a really important topic, and so it's great that you're doing this work.
Thanks, Patrick. If you're after the full research report, it's in the chat now and also available on our website. But thanks, everyone, for coming along, and we'll see you next time.